40 was my goal. Yeah. We had 40.
Good afternoon and welcome to the February 27th meeting of the Rotary Club of Louisville. I'm Luke Schmidt, President of our club and President of L.D. Schmidt Associates. To lead us in our invocation today is Barry Barker. Barry is the retired Executive Director of TARC, our immediate past President, Paul Harris Fellow, and our most recent recipient of the Lifetime Service Award. Barry.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, President Luke, and I bring you greetings in behalf of your awards and recognition committee as we continue to recognize Rotarians whose service rises above what is just expected of us as Rotarians. So for me, the value of the Rotary experience is found in its purpose, its people, and its philanthropy. From time to time, our fellow Rotarians become engaged in service opportunities that allow them to experience this value all in one package. And such is the human trafficking initiative that our club has been involved in for some time now. And so today it's my privilege to present, in behalf of the Award and Recognition Committee, the Service Above Self Award to those Rotarians who have given leadership and provided the service in this all-important initiative. Not all of them are here today, but I will call their names. And the ones who aren't here today, if you would come forward, we'd like to present you with your award. They are Sharon LaRue, Jerry Martin, Andy Luttrell, Jackie Ford, Jim Smith, Susan Cepeda, and Alice Bridges. And just one other recognition. Larry Sloan, who is already a Service Above Self Rotarian, was also very involved and continues to be involved in this project. Larry, where are you? Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Barry. Congratulations to our recipients, and thanks for all that you do to make this club and this community a better place. We really appreciate it. And now I have a quick shout out, and this is for Denise Sears. Denise, if you're here, I don't know if she's here today. Please stand. Denise is the CEO of Supplies Overseas and was named the Healthcare Hero for 2020 for community outreach. So Denise, congratulations. Now for a couple of quick announcements on my part. First of all, I want to thank the 30 Rotarians who participated in our second community industrial tour last week at EW Color House. This was a fascinating tour about a Louisville-based firm whose products are consumed 2 billion times a day around the world. And so those of you that were on the tour, we got to learn all about that, and it was fascinating. A special thanks to EW, the Color House chairman and CEO Ted Nixon, who personally hosted our tour. Now we're working on our next tour, so please stay tuned, and we'll have more information on that a little bit later on. And now, returning to the podium to introduce today's speaker is Alice Bridges. Alice is the principal of AOD Consulting and also past president of our club. Alice.
Good afternoon. In 2012, Cynthia Knapek was named president of the Leadership Louisville Center, a national leader in civic engagement and leadership development. Like many of you, I first got to know Cynthia through participating in one of Leadership Louisville's many programs. For me, it was the 2013 Bingham Fellows, which focused on building a smart food culture. Meeting Cynthia and my fellow classmates was really a seminal moment in my career and one that I still get value from even today. Cynthia is particularly proud that the work the center has done to foster inclusivity was recognized with the 2016 Champion of Diversity Award from the Urban League. Before joining Leadership Louisville, Cynthia's work included engagements with government, Fortune 500, and other social sector organizations. In addition to being a member of our distinguished network of leaders at Rotary, Cynthia is active in many community organizations, including serving on the board of Greater Louisville, Inc. Her street cred as a leader of leaders is exemplified by her service as the National Board Chair for the Association of Leadership Programs, which is building networks for hundreds of community leadership programs across the country. Cynthia has a master's degree from the University of Louisville and several certifications in leadership training and organizational development. She's also a TED Talk addict and an accomplished speaker in the TED Talk style. Please enjoy hearing from our community's leader of leaders, Cynthia Knapek. All right, I'm going to take this out so that I can wonder. Thank you all. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to talk about the things that I love, some of the things that we're doing at Leadership Louisville Center, and specifically some of the work that we're doing around elevating leaders in our community. I know that I probably have quite a few alumni in the room. Who are my Leadership Louisville alumni? Yay! That's awesome. Fantastic. So we have recently gone through a strategic planning purpose, and we have a new purpose statement. Very excited about it. Our purpose is to inspire and equip leaders to be better and do better. And the inspire piece of the puzzle is really all about the civic programs that many of you are alumni of. But the second piece, the piece that is about equipping leaders, is the piece that we've really been working on developing and growing. We have discovered that it's really important to have quantity of leaders who raise their hand to show up and serve, but it's equally important to make sure that those leaders are quality leaders as well. So we have all of the traditional programs that many of you are alumni of. You know many of them. And then we've also, our most recent ad is our Leadership Green Room. Green Room is all about making investments in those quality leaders. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is a part of our Green Room initiative. Today we're talking about this. I'm going to start with this. I'm just going to put that out there and say femininity is the operating system of 21st century progress. Lost half the room. So what we are talking about at Leadership Louisville Center is we're talking about how do we make sure that we can get things done with and through other people. We're talking about how do we make sure that each individual is successful. We're also talking about how do we make sure that our organizations are successful. And so Alice asked me here today to talk about leadership traits of 21st century leaders. And that's what I'm going to do. I do have a particular focus that we're going to talk about today. I like this book. This book is very interesting for this particular endeavor for the next 20 minutes or so, because the fellow who wrote this book, The Athena Doctrine, he did not set out to write a book about women's leadership. He actually set out to just discover what are we looking for in 21st century leaders. That was his task, that was his charge. And what he discovered is particularly interesting. He had a very robust sample. He looked at 64,000 people. His survey included 64,000 people in 13 different countries. So not a small sample. And he said, I want to figure out what 21st century leadership is about. He wanted to pull in a pretty robust sampling of people. And he asked lots and lots of questions. Like, for example, he asked, true or false, the world would be a better place if men thought more like women. 66% of us said yes. I would also like to point out that 63% of men in his sample said the world would be a better place if men thought more like women. This is just one of the things that he talked about. And again, he's talking about 21st century leaders, and he's trying to figure it out. A lot of the things that make 21st century leaders a little bit different are some of the things that are happening across the globe. They start in your pocket with your smartphones, right? That's fundamentally changed the way that we do business. Smartphones make it kind of lead to the globalization of business. It's easy to be a person in Paris, Kentucky, doing business in Paris, France now. And all of that leads to a new focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how do we maximize all of the differences at the table to achieve great things. New trends in business include things like the sharing economy, and all of our friends at Uber and VRBO and all of those things where trust is actually a key component of our business. As we start to hire the millennials, making sure that our businesses have a purpose is becoming really, really important. So as we think about these shifts in the way we do business, what do we look for in our 21st century leaders? And his methodology was he split his survey sample in half, and he said, you folks over there, I'm going to give you these 125 traits, and I want you to tell me what you think is the most important in the leader. And I want you, right here on this half, I want you to tell me, of these 125 traits, which do you think are traditionally masculine and traditionally feminine? Not always. We understand nothing is always one or the other, but just when you see this list, do you think it's mostly masculine or most often feminine? So while you folks are over there telling us what you're looking for in your leader in the 21st century, you all are splitting them, male and female. This is what he found out. Of the top 10 things that we're looking for in our 21st century leaders, 8 of the 10 are more traditionally feminine traits. The expressive, plans for future, reasonable, loyal, flexible, patient, intuitive, collaborative. These are things that we often think of as traditionally feminine traits. And they're on the top of our list for what we're looking for in a leader who can function, who can perform, who can excel, who can get the most out of our organizations and our business. The other two are decisiveness and resilience. When we have been talking about this in groups all over the place, I usually ask people what resonates and what connects with them. This is a little bit bigger group, so I don't think we have time to really dig in and figure out what stands out. But I will tell you that a lot of times when we have this conversation, the resilience piece is one that women question as to whether or not it's in the right column. And I think that one's really, really interesting, especially because it comes up all the time. And my explanation for it is that the resilience piece of the puzzle for this is about what we're looking for in our leaders within the context of the work world. And I think if we had been looking at traditional masculine and feminine traits in the context of life, it might have looked a little differently. Because my observation is that when we think about resilience and the things that happen to us in life that are significant, such as the death of a child, aging parents, all of those things that are significant life events, women may be more resilient. But when you think about what happens in your workday, I do think men are often more resilient. These are things that look like things that happen with your P&L statements. And whereas a man might look at that and say, wow, I'm really glad we took that risk. It was a colossal disaster, a major failure. That's okay, we'll pick ourselves up and move right on. That's not how a woman views that. So I think this is an interesting place for us to start. But I will also tell you that in pulling together some of this research, we found study after study after study. I could literally stand up here and filibuster for the next 2 days
with just studies that tell us that when women are given leadership roles, they excel. This is just another one. This one says, this is about emotional intelligence. Women are stronger in 15 of the 19 capabilities. More articles hitting the pages of the of business magazines. There's a study by Credit Suisse about investor returns and how women-led companies tend to perform very well. In fact, if you stack women-led companies against performance of the S&P, women-led companies are going to give you a better ROI. There's a story about one of the Shark Tank investors, Kevin O'Leary, who did some research on his own portfolio, asked his people, tell me who's making me money. And his people did the research and diced it all up and said, Kevin, your women-led companies are making you the most amount of return on your investment. So I could just keep going on and on. And I hope that all of the women in the room, are you feeling good? It's like, good, it's so good. I'd like you to hold on to that thought for a moment. While we switch gears a little bit. So despite all this, we got all this good information. It says, wow, when we give women the leadership roles, great things happen. And also, only, this is 2018 data. It says 4.8% of the S&P 500 companies are led by women. The 2019 data is a little bit better. It's like 5.6, which probably means one woman got CEO role. Go team. I've heard that if you look at Fortune 500 companies, that there are more men named John who are the CEO of a Fortune 500 company than there are women. There's a lot of data. We know all the data about pay equity and the gap that is there. And it's interesting to note that it's not just about men and women. Different women have different experiences of pay equity. So we layer that on top of the issue. The question that we pose is, if we have all this really great data that says when you give women leadership roles, good things happen, but also we have this really not so great data about the gender equity issues, what's the differential? Why are we not seeing more women in leadership roles? So to articulate that, have us think about that, I want to tell you a story, the story hour. And to breathe life into the story, what I would like for you all to do is I would like for you to kind of close your eyes and picture the characters in my story for a moment, right? So in my story, I have a banker, I have a nurse, I have a lawyer, and I have a teacher. Now, let me poll the audience and ask you this question. How many of you, when you closed your eyes to picture the characters in my story, when I asked you to picture a banker, how many of you all pictured a guy in a suit? Yes. How many of you, when I asked you to picture a nurse, pictured a woman? Yep. A lawyer. How many of you all pictured a guy? Yeah. And our teacher is a woman, right? Okay. So, for the last 10 minutes, I've been talking about women and go for it and girl power, and yet still, we have these things. We have these unconscious bias, and I think that's one of the things that we really need to start making them conscious. We need to start shedding light on them. We need to start talking about them. We need to bring them out of the unknown and into the known. And I think it's interesting when you talk about unconscious bias. Sadly, unconscious bias is an equal opportunity discriminator. It doesn't really matter. I mean, the women in this audience were just as likely to have pictured a man as the banker. And in fact, I will also tell you, I will also tell you that one of my first jobs was at a bank, and I worked for some amazing men who I think had my very best interests at heart. They were good people who wanted me to succeed. And also, I think that when they closed their eyes, thinking about who do we promote and who do we move into leadership, I think that when they closed their eyes and pictured, I don't think they saw me when they thought about, well, what does a banker look like, right? When we do those unconscious things. So this whole idea of second generation bias is one of the things that I think has to be part of our collective strategies for how do we bridge that gap? How do we move that forward? I think until we do, it'll be incredibly difficult for us to change any of those metrics that we don't like. Right now, there's an interesting story, case study, that is based on Heidi Rosen. So Heidi Rosen was a successful entrepreneur, venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, and there's a Columbia study where they put her information on a profile. This one's Heidi, and they put same exact information, except they changed it, and this one is Howard. And they had the class evaluate these two profiles. Same profiles, but one is Heidi and the other is Howard. Both of them were rated as fairly successful. Could definitely see where this person would be would bring some strong things. The thing is, when we evaluated Howard, we said, we like that guy. Yeah, we think he's going to bring some really good stuff to the team. He is going to be an accelerator. We think he's going to push us in all the right ways. We like Howard. Heidi, clearly very successful, but you know what? You don't want to take a guess. What do we think about Heidi? What are some of the words we use to describe Heidi? What was that? Pushy. Yeah, Heidi, she's kind of pushy. Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, Heidi is pushy. She's maybe bossy. She might be the other B word. And we just don't like her. So these are the things that are standing in our way. What do we do to drive change? This is the question. What do we do to actually move the needle and do something different? That's what I'm all about. It's not about just dumping some stuff here and saying, yeah, I don't know, boy, what are you going to do? What are some small things that in the short amount of time that we have together this afternoon, I can send you out the door and think, oh, I think, yeah, there are some things that we could do that make a really positive difference. There are 3 things that we want to share with you. One is centered on changing the conversation, changing the way that we talk about this. The second is enlisting the help of men. And the third thing we're going to talk about is courage. The first piece of the puzzle, changing the conversation. And I love this quote. This is from Thomas Falk, who is retired now, but he was the chairman of Kimberly-Clark. Says, this issue is not about equality or fairness, it's about winning. We can have lots and lots of conversations about the rightness of things. We should do this because it's the right thing to do. And I don't think that that gets us very far if what we really want to do is change the outcomes. So while it's amazing and great to be right, I would rather get things done. So one of the things, and if we want to get things done, is shifting the storytelling, shifting the narrative. I like the Thomas Falk story because when Thomas Falk inherited the reins at Kimberly-Clark, he had no women on his executive leadership team. None, no women. Does anyone know, what does Kimberly-Clark sell? That was a lot of people. What do they sell? Diapers. Yes, diapers. Huggies is one of their big cash producers. Anybody else know what else does Kimberly-Clark produce? Yeah, Kotex. Yeah. He walked into a board meeting and they were discussing strategy around Kotex, and the strategy leader was a man. And the people in the room were men. And he was like, it's something, besides the fact that it was really awkward, awkward. He also thought, and I don't think we're getting this right. How could we possibly be getting this right if this is who we've got on the team? And so he instituted sweeping changes at Kimberly-Clark that resulted in significant improvements to their bottom line. He radically changed the face of leadership at Kimberly-Clark, and it had huge, huge benefit for him. And this is why he's one of the champions of this whole idea of it's not about equality or fairness. This, for me, is about winning. And I think we get many, many more miles from that than the other conversations. Next piece of our puzzle is how do we enlist men? How do we enlist the help of men? We like to talk about sponsorship. And sponsorship is a little bit different than mentorship. How I would describe the difference is that a mentor talks with you, offers you advice. A sponsor talks about you. And specifically, a sponsor talks about you in rooms where you cannot be. A sponsor talks about you in positive ways. A sponsor walks into meetings that are important, carrying your water. In the same way that we have sponsors who invest in the Leadership Louisville Center because not necessarily there's anything in it for them, they just simply believe that this is a good investment for the community. Sponsors invest their social capital in other people. I want to make sure that everyone is thinking about from both directions. One is, as women on the rise, are you thinking about sponsors? Are you thinking about who you have that will talk about you in rooms where you cannot be? And if you are in those rooms, then I want to ask you, whose water are you carrying when you walk in? Focusing on that is one of the ways that we will make a big difference. The other thing is that as you're thinking about mentor and sponsor relationships, I want to talk just a little bit about exactly how we mentor and sponsor women. There's a great TED Talk. Trust me, I know, I've seen a billion of them. Susan Colantano, she's a researcher. One of the pieces of research she was looking at is the advancement of women, and she said there are 3 critical things that you're evaluated on when you get into those upper level positions. First one is leading self. Yeah, duh, right, got that. Second one is leading others. Yep, right, we all do that. There's a third piece of the puzzle that is more important than the other 2. It is weighted strategically as significantly more important than leading self or your ability to get excellence out of other people. And it is a piece of the puzzle that women don't always know about. And the third piece of the puzzle is leading the business. It is about your demonstrated business and financial acumen. Do you understand P&L? Can you lead the business? Can you do future trend analysis? And can I see you in that role? And what she found is that even women who have this, who are incredibly talented and have financial acumen and the capacities to lead the business, they didn't know that they were not only being judged on it, but that it was more important than any of the rest of the criteria. And when you don't have the evaluation matrix, you can't meet the expectation. So helping women understand that. And also thinking about how we talk to women about, sometimes when we are mentoring, we're talking about the second piece that is leading others. And sometimes our mentorship sounds a little bit like helping women be more like a man. And I will refer you back to the original slides that says that's not what we need to do. Women make excellent leaders when they lean into the strengths that are uniquely theirs. So what we need to do instead is this piece, which is help women understand how to show up in a way that signifies you can be the leader of the business. Third piece is you get in life what you have the courage to ask for. And I think this is fundamental, what we have to be teaching women, young women, women on the rise. It's really, really important. And part of it is simple math. When you get into the pay equity, think about this. Men are exponentially more likely to negotiate their salaries. They're exponentially more likely to take that risk and to have the courage to ask for what they want. So when you look at the pay equity slide and you think, how can I move the needle on that? This is how we do it. As we instill the courage in our women leaders to make those asks. The other piece of this is that women are choosing not to try. This is again related to the courage piece of the puzzle. When you post a job, there are 100 bullet points on the job. And if a man has like 60% of them, actually in my loose observation, I feel like if they have like 3 bullet points on there, they're like, yeah, that's me all day, I can do that job, I'm in. A woman looks at those 100 bullet points on there and goes, yeah, I've got 99 of them, but I don't have 100, so yeah, I don't think I'm not doing that. I'm not putting my name in for that. And again, it's linked to courage. It's linked to that, to what we do to make investments so that we are choosing to try. All of this has led to the work that we're doing at the Leadership Louisville Center that I'm very excited about because it is centered around what are the investments that we can make in women leaders that change that pyramid structure to more of a square or an oval or whatever, pick your geometry of choice. And what we're teaching is centered on our 3 favorite C's. It's rooted in confidence, which is the building block, it's the foundation for everything. You can't show up as a leader until you're on 2 solid feet and understand who you are. The second piece is about connection. This is particularly important in some of the work that we're doing around helping people find their voice. When you show up in a room and you have the full voice and your full conviction, it's most often because you have allies in the room. And so helping people understand the value of that and how that connects to your ability to show up and have a voice and be a strong leader within your organization. And the third thing is courage, because courage is the thing that turns the little thought bubbles in our head into the actual action, into our capacity to make that leap, to take that jump, to put our name in the hat. These are the things that are core to what we're doing at Leadership Louisville. We're very excited about it, and I think it's important for the individual, but I also think it's important for us as organizations. And we're approaching it from those 2 lenses. These are the things that we do to invest in the individual to succeed, but we're also thinking about how do we have inclusive organizations here in this community. And I like this framework. And it's one of the reasons why, so the framework is diversity is a seat at the table. Inclusion is having a voice. The third one is the one that I think is really, really important, and it is about belonging. And belonging is about being somewhere where your voice matters. And this is why a lot of our work is centered around helping people find their voice. And this is why we make investments at that level for the individual, but it's also why we talk about it from a cultural perspective of our organizations. So for those of us that have leadership roles in our organizations and have the capacity to drive change, I think this is really important. I think this is where our companies are going to be moving. I think everyone is going to be talking about this as being centrally important, the success of our businesses. And if you think about what I was discussing at the beginning, the shift in businesses and global trends, this is going to be one of the differentials between whether or not your business is successful or not. I'm going to leave you with one parting thing, and then if we have, I think we'll have a couple questions, or time for a few questions. So if I had one piece of advice, one thing that I think is creates huge ripples, it creates win-win-win opportunities, it's this. Korn Ferry has recently done a study. They interviewed the women who have held CEO roles in Fortune 500 companies. There's not a lot of them. There's only like 90 some of them that have ever, in the history, ever held that role. They interviewed 45 of them. Of that group, of the group of 45, actually I think it's 48, of the 48 women that they interviewed, 3 of them said, you know, I actually never wanted to be a leader. I kind of found myself in these circumstances and I was pushed here and there and I did that. 5 of them said, baby, I was born that way. I knew from birth I was going to be large and in charge and nothing was going to stop me. The other 40 in this study said, plus or minus, there was they described a sentinel moment that they remember where someone looked at them and said, you have something that is really important. I think there's something in you that says you could be a spectacular leader for our organization. 40 of them said there was a moment. So what I want to leave you with is think about when was the last time you did that for another person? When you tap someone and say, I think there's something in you, it creates more leaders, it creates more social capital and more connection between you and other people, and it creates that sense of belonging in your organization that makes people feel like this is a place where my voice matters, where people see me. So that's the one I would give you as my parting piece of advice for one opportunity that we have, that you have, that you can leave here and in the next 30 minutes have done something significant to move the needle on these things. Okay, so I think we have probably a couple of minutes. Kind of do. We have just a couple minutes. If anyone has a question, I'm happy to answer them. I also want to tell you while you're making your way up there to the microphone, I want to invite you to hang out with us again. We have a lot of things coming up at Leadership Louisville Center. You'll see one of the things up there that's front row center is our programs for women. Authentic Leadership for Women, I think, only has a few seats left. And Find Your Voice is sold out and has been sold out for quite some time. We shall put it back on the schedule. But there's a lot of things coming up. There's some information at your table. And the last thing is our Best of Leadership Summit is coming up. It is next week, and I know you're thinking, oh, next week, I don't have time. I can't be there for the full day. So I'm doing one thing for you. Because you may not be able to be there for the whole day, I have a special discount code for Rotary, $145 off. If you just want to come see one of the speakers now, it is a great proposition for you to come hang out, see Dan Heath talk about his new book or any of our other speakers. Questions?
Thanks, Cynthia. Sorry to be so eager to get up to the microphone. Great presentation, and thank you for leading the best leadership program in the country. Don't y'all agree? So your presentation focused on Fortune 500 companies. Those of us that are involved in the nonprofit world realize it's not for the faint of heart. And my anecdotal observation is, I know in my profession, there's a lot of women that have absolutely kicked last. We have a high percentage of female leadership. When you talk about courage, when you talk about believing in oneself and the strengths that come in female leadership, my question is, what can we learn from nonprofits to help drive the rest of the world? Some might say, well, it's because nonprofits don't make as much money. I believe it's because it takes a lot of passion and a lot of courage in believing in oneself. So Has that been studied? And I'm interested in your thoughts.
So I think there's a lot more data out there about our largest companies because there's a lot more resources there to study how they operate. I think I can certainly attest anecdotally to the rise of women in leadership in the nonprofit sector. And if you went back to that first slide where you looked at the traits of women in leadership, there is a natural connection point there. I'm not aware of any specific study about nonprofit leaders that are, and the rise of women in that industry, but it would be worth us looking into and seeing if there are. And if not, then maybe we should commission that to start here, see what we can find out.
Yes, and as a former CEO female of a nonprofit, I jump right in. Cynthia, thank you so much for having me. Confidence in the connection and the courage to come before a predominantly male audience with a predominantly male history that is soon changing. So my question for you is, have you studied, and if you have you considered offering any kind of courses in lateral violence?
So that's an interesting question. Most of our core competency is centered around how do you get things done with and through other people. I think there are some really good collaborations that we've been looking at for how do we take what we know about content, curriculum, and how to land a meaningful experience. And that could certainly be in our future, but I don't know that we have that core competency. We like partnerships, so.
And the reason I ask is because I did not have the courage several years ago when our second largest employer in Jefferson County asked me to develop and teach a course in lateral violence. And once I studied it, for those that don't know what that is, I did not know. And it is deliberate, intended, negative behavior, sometimes at a violent level, toward your peers in the workplace, as opposed to your adversaries. So as you think about education and healthcare, predominantly female, I would encourage, I'm going to ask you a question you don't have to answer. Would you please consider putting this into your curriculum as you look at the future?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. And I think part of our curriculum around finding your voice touches on that in a very light way. Finding your voice is largely about having the capacity to say the things that need to be said in a way that people will hear you. So I think there's probably slices of that in there. And one of the things that we're very, very excited about at Leadership Louisville is what the future holds for us. The programs that we've got up here right now are 1 and 2 days. There's not a whole lot of opportunity to do deep dive, really significant and meaningful learning. But we love doing this work, and in our strategic plan, we have deeper dives in our future, in our fairly near future. So I think that could definitely be something that is in the deeper dive programs.
Hi, thank you for a great program. My name's Larry Sloan, and my observation and then a question is that for about 50 years I called mostly women buyers. I sold things like yarn and fabric and sewing notions. And a lot of them were small stores, but there were major department store buyers as well as later on people at Michael's, Joanne Fabrics, and so forth. And I always thought that the people who were most successful were decisive, they had a vision of what they wanted to do, and they were risk takers, which is an interesting observation because these were mostly women. And then also I was thinking about people like Golda Meir, Margaret Thatcher, and Angela Merkel, and then Martha Lane Collins. They were risk takers, and Martha Lane Collins took a big risk on Toyota, and that's probably one of the best moves that's been made in the last 50 years for this state. So my question is, I'm a cynic about generalizations, but I think that men and women both can possess these qualities that you mentioned in this, and that's what I think where the difference is. I don't think it's really a generalization that is true. It's just these qualities land
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely the case, and that's partly why I say it's, when they do the split of this is traditionally masculine, this is traditionally feminine, it's not an absolute, it's never an absolute. It's just kind of, this is what we loosely associate. And I do think that the risk-taking piece is hugely connected to success. I also think that if you look at it, some of the women that have taken bigger risks may be more of the outliers, and that may be why we have more of a triangle than a more equal shape there. And risk-taking is probably one of the things that we need to work on, and it's connected to courage. There's a second piece of that. If you teach courage and risk-taking, you also have to teach resilience and grit. And so I would definitely say you're right about that piece of the puzzle being significant. And I think the data would probably bear out that that's something that exists more predominantly in young men. And it's linked back to both. There's some genetic coding in there, but there's also how we raise young men and how we raise young women that is a factor as well.
Hi, Elizabeth Stroll. Curious if you consider doing trainings for men on how to better collaborate and be allies, because I think there's a lot of opportunity there, because a lot of what men I'm close to who are advocates for me, I feel like they still say things like, well, you'll be fine because you're a female, the white men are doomed, you know, and it's like, I think at the end of the day, we all have to
You are, by the way.
we have to work together, and where I see the gap is really just getting men to understand like how we can be collaborative and support each other.
So as I mentioned, we're very excited because as part of our strategic plan, the growth opportunity for Leadership Louisville Center is largely about how we make investments in people's skills. And specifically, one of the areas we've identified is women in leadership. And as we've been doing our focus groups, one of the things that has come up is, can we work on some programming that is about how do we elevate and activate male allies. So we are currently in the piloting, planning, and general co-conspirating how we might architect that. And I would say stay tuned, watch this space for a preview of coming attractions. Thank you all so much.
Let me ask you, are the people that are selected for the leadership role, is that based on talent or is it based on something else?
Yeah.
So do you have, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, are you biased in favor of one sex or the other? And who makes up your selection committee?
So for those of you that know, our civic programs, a lot of them have selection processes, not all of them, but some of them do. And there's usually a selection committee that is made up of the board. And actually the diversity of the class is one of the most significant factors when they go through and do class selection. And that's diversity of class in the broadest sense. So we think about, we want each class to be a representative of the community. So that includes things like racial diversity, geographic diversity, diversity of industry, male-female diversity. So we actually look at all of those factors in terms of how we choose the class. And then we are also looking, because when people are selected into the class, that's an investment that we've made in them as a leader. So we are looking for people who show demonstrated leadership capacity and the future hope that they're going to use that to advance the greater good. Those are the things that we look at for those civic programs. The skill development workshops are broad and open, and we hope lots of different kinds of people participate.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Wonderful presentation, lots to take down. Let's give her another round. Along that line, I'm very proud that our club also, over the next 2 years, our next two presidents are both females, Sylvia Schmidt and Jean Wesley Savio. So we have a great bunch of leaders coming up through the pipeline. It's going to really serve this club well. Two quick reminders, if you're interested in learning more about Rotary, please see Craig Sherman at the Wise Rotary table right outside the door. And next week, don't forget, we'll be here at the Holly Center, we'll be at the waterfront. With that, we're adjourned.